Good morning, folks. Good to see you. I've decided to stand up for this talk on Maundy Thursday as we think about Jesus as he's preparing to go to the cross. So welcome and good morning to Sue and to Janice and to anyone else who is watching. So we have all been praying, of course, for our Prime Minister, who has been in hospital now for 5 days. Thankfully, we understand that he is improving. But in the meantime, he's had, I think, Dominic Raab as his deputy and other people there close to the inner circle working with him. Jesus had 3 people who were his inner circle, if you like, Peter, James, and John. And they had been with him on the Mount of Transfiguration. They had also been with him in the Garden of Gethsemane, where they witnessed Jesus praying and asking that God's will be done, even though the cup that he was to drink was going to be incredibly difficult. So Peter, James, and John were close to Jesus, and James and John, 2 brothers, the sons of thunder, these 2 brothers spoke to Jesus in Mark chapter 10, which is what I want to read from today. And they make a request of Jesus. It says that James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came to him and they said, "Teacher, we want you to do for us whatever we ask." "What do you want me to do for you?" Jesus asked. They replied, let one of us sit at your right and the other at your left in your glory." "You don't know what you're asking," Jesus said. "Can you drink the cup I drink or be baptized with the baptism I am baptized with?" "We can," they answered. Jesus said to them, "You will drink the cup I drink and be baptized with the baptism that I am baptized with. But to sit at my right or left is not for me to grant. These places belong to those for whom it has been prepared." When the 10 heard about this, they became indignant with James and John. Jesus called them together and said, "You know that those who are regarded as rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their high officials exercise authority over them. Not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant, and whoever wants to be first must be slave of all. For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many." So James and John are saying to Jesus, "You know, Jesus, when you become king, we'd like to, maybe my brother could be Chancellor of the Exchequer on your left and I could be Home Secretary on your right, and then if for any reason you're out of action, we can step up." And so they're kind of thinking Jesus' kingdom is coming. And they have good reason to be putting this forward to Jesus, because Jesus has announced that his kingdom is coming. And in the verses just before the verses I read to you, Jesus has told the disciples that he is about to be betrayed to the chief priests and the rulers of the law, that he will be condemned to death. He'll be handed over to the Romans, who will flog him, spit on him, mock him, and kill him, but that he will rise again from the dead. So Jesus predicts, and this is the 4th time that he's predicted this in Mark's gospel, that he is going to confront the authorities, if you like, but he's going to be handed over, betrayed by his own people, by the Jews, who will condemn him first, and then handed over to the Romans to execute him. I mean, that is a terrible thing. Imagine if, for example, I was arrested for, walking in a park with somebody, and I was taken to a court, a British court, and I was tried and betrayed and found and condemned and found guilty. But then if I was handed over by the British to ISIS for them to execute me. Now that sounds outlandish, but that's what's happening with Jesus. He's being betrayed by his own people on a false accusation, and then he is handed over to the foreigners, to the Romans, who are going to execute him in the worst possible way that they have invented. So Jesus has told his disciples that he's going to Jerusalem, and now he's marching to Jerusalem. They're following him, um, looking rather afraid because he's very purposeful on his journeys into Jerusalem. It's clear that Jesus is a man on a mission. He is now going to Jerusalem to do the thing that he came to do, to establish his kingdom. And so his disciples, they don't understand this whole thing about death and crucifixion, but they do kind of want to hear him say that his kingdom is coming, that he's about to become king. And they're hoping that just as Judas Maccabeus, for example, had led a revolution against the Romans back in, I think, 168 AD, BC rather, and led a temporary revival of the Jewish nation where they had become their own autonomous nation again for about 60 or 70 years. So now they are hoping that this Jesus, the Son of Man, prophesied in Daniel chapter 7, is going to establish his kingdom, but it's going to be a permanent, everlasting kingdom. As it says in Daniel 7, the Son of Man will come riding on the clouds with his angels in majesty and glory, and he will establish an everlasting kingdom. And so they're expecting the Messiah to do that, the Son of Man, who Jesus chooses to call himself 15 times in Mark's Gospel, the Son of Man. And so they're thinking, right, Jesus is now on a mission, and we're going to have positions of power and authority next to him in his kingdom. James and John in particular probably feel that they've been born to rule. They are known by the high priest. We find that out from John's gospel. The high priest lets John hears that John wants Peter to come into the inner courtyard, and so he sends a message and says, "Yes, that's fine. I know James. I know John. So yes, their friends can come in. Let him in." And so they clearly have well-connected positions. James and John, they're well-connected. Maybe they're even related to the high priest. We don't know, but certainly they feel that they're born to rule. And Jesus has talked about how he is, when he was up on the Mount of Transfiguration, they saw Jesus in his glory. They still saw him in his majesty, with dressed in white, with Moses and Elijah, with God speaking from heaven, "This is my son whom I love." And so they have good reason to think that now Jesus is going to establish his kingdom in glory and power. But Jesus turns to them and says, "You don't know what you're asking. You don't get it. Can you drink this cup that I'm about to drink?" This is the cup that he's going to wrestle with about drinking in the Garden of Gethsemane, where he said to God, "Take this cup from me." This cup is going to be crucifixion on the cross and all the pain that's involved in dying by asphyxiation on a cross. But this cup is going to be worse than just the physical pain. It's also going to be the spiritual and emotional agony of experiencing the wrath of God being poured on him. All the evil in the world, all the darkness, all the sin in the world that God is so angry with is going to be poured out on Jesus on the cross, so that Jesus is going to cry, my God, why have you forsaken me?" He is going to experience isolation from his eternal Father on the cross, and he's going to soak up the wrath of God. All the evil in the world is going to come upon him, and so he's facing that definite destiny that he's about to go to in Jerusalem. And so he says to his disciples, "You don't know what you're asking. Can you drink this cup?" Well, actually, you will drink it. You will suffer. You won't suffer the wrath of God like I am, because I'm coming to take the wrath of God so you don't have to take it. But you will suffer, James and John. But no, I can't give you positions on the right and left. That's not for me to give you. Now, the other disciples hear about this request, and they are indignant, and they come and they complain to Jesus that James and John have tried to do this manipulative thing. And so Jesus speaks to them and gives them a pep talk. And he says, you know that those who are regarded as rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them. And he says, I'm not like that. Yeah, the Gentiles, the Romans, they have a gospel, a Roman gospel. And this gospel is that Augustus is Lord. Whenever an emperor came to the throne in the Roman Empire, he was proclaimed throughout the kingdom as heralds went out to the towns and villages, proclaiming that Augustus is Lord, and he's bringing peace, Pax Romana, to the Roman Empire. And so it's good news. It's the gospel that you have someone in charge on the throne who has crushed his enemies and who has asserted his authority and is lording it over people. And this is the Roman good news. But Jesus says, I have a gospel, I have a message of good news, but I am going to be Lord. But the way I'm going to be Lord is not by exercising authority over people and crushing people. Jesus redefines power. Jesus shows us what real power is all about. It's about serving. It's about humbling himself. Yeah, there's a hymn that was written called Jesus is Lord, All Creation Proclaims It. And it was written by David Mansell, who was a great prophet. And he wrote this hymn. But you know, this hymn has got the line in it that goes like this. It says, Jesus is Lord, yet from his throne eternal, in flesh he came to die in pain. And that verse, Tom Wright points out, is a fantastic verse, apart from one word, yet. Because it says, Jesus is Lord, yet he humbled himself. And really, it should be, Jesus is Lord, so he humbled himself. It's not despite the fact that Jesus is Lord, yet he humbled himself. It is because Jesus is Lord, he humbled himself. God, by very nature, humbles himself. Jesus did not consider equality with God something to be grasped, but made himself nothing, taking on human nature, taking on the very nature of a servant, humbling himself even to death on a cross. This is our God, the servant king. Yeah, the one who flung stars into space, to cruel nails surrendered. Yes, Jesus will come in glory and every knee will bow. But the way to glory is through shame. The way to the crown is through the cross. There will be no gain without pain. And Jesus knows that he has to go. And so he therefore says, the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom. That's our God. He came to serve, to give his life as a ransom for many, he says. Yes, there will be many who will accept him as Redeemer, many who will bow down to him as Lord, many who will acknowledge him as the King. But the way to power is going to be through crucifixion. And so on our Maundy Thursday, as we think about Jesus agonizing in the Garden of Gethsemane, because he's coming to terms with the reality that it's his destiny to suffer as the suffering servant and die in our place on the cross. And so let's remember the suffering of Jesus. Let's reflect on it. Let's receive his forgiveness. Let's know that he did that for us. He took the cup of God's wrath for us so that we could be forgiven and healed and our iniquities could be taken from us. And let's remember that he did this for the many. Let's go out and tell the many. This Easter weekend, let's tell people. Let's invite people to church on Sunday morning. We'll send you a link. Send it out to your neighborhood WhatsApp groups. Invite people, because Jesus came for the many, and the many will receive him as their Redeemer and acknowledge him as their Lord, as we do today. So God bless you. Let's be like Jesus. Let's serve him today as he served us. And have a great day. Thanks for listening. Take care. Bye-bye.